Welcome to everything you need as an auditor or organization to achieve your certifications. This is a free course that will guide you to get certified because it will give you everything you need that is required by all the standards that we are going to cover, including quality management system, occupational health and safety, environmental management, and food safety management. All these standards, we are going to give you everything you need to get certified, whether you are starting from the beginning or if you want to improve and eliminate all the non-conformances, we will also give you all the tools you need. And this is specific to cold storage, warehousing, and logistics this time. And in our previous courses, we covered the manufacturing. So this is specific for cold storage and warehousing and logistics. And it's going to show you how cold chain organizations globally pass stage 1, stage 2, and sustain 0 findings across all these standards. And we are going to draw these from the successful examples from New Zealand because we need a benchmark to show you with the specific regulations. We cannot just do it randomly like that. So we put example of New Zealand, which is like known for the excellence of the operations in all these standards. And that means it can pertain the examples that you need to replicate to be applicable in your own jurisdictions, and you will pass the audit. Now, first, let's have an overview. And this model, course, is for global supply chain, or global cold chain management. So first, if we take a look at management system for ISO, applying all these standards like 9001 and 14001 and ISO for 45001 and 22000 standards to cold chain operations, which we are going to cover, organizations are required to align with local legislation relevant to health and safety, environmental management, and food safety management. All right? For examples, in New Zealand context that we are going to keep giving you example from New Zealand, this includes you must align with the Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 and the Resources Management Act of 1991 and the Food Act of 2014 with guidance from WorkSafe New Zealand and the EPA. And we are recording this on February 2026. So by the time you are watching this, if you are watching in the future, look for the latest updates. For FSSC 22000 requirements, specific requirements for transport and storage organizations. We are going to cover all these specific requirements. In compliance, also it requires the compliance with National Food Safety Program and hazardous substances regulations is crucial to align with those standards for the relevant operations in your organization. So for instance, in New Zealand, this involves MPI or the Ministry for Primary Industries, food safety programs, and the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996. So in FSSC 22000 requirements, we must comply with all these national requirements. And you should comply with your national requirements as well. And also we will give you real-world audit scenarios to show you how navigating certifications audits within the cold chain environment, from receiving to dispatching. We will cover typical scenarios encountered by organizations worldwide, including those servicing major retail chains. So we'll include also example of major customers. In New Zealand, for example, these include chains like Foodstuff and Woolworth, New Zealand, to ensure the zero findings through our course. Now, what cold chain organization really is? Let's first look at the context. Cold chain organizations globally they store, handle, and transport food products they do not manufacture. Typically, they operate under intense time pressure, strict temperature sensitivity requirements mandated by relevant food safety authorities, and face high interface risk at each handover point in the supply chain. And that means the high interface risks. Interface is when you, for example, if you are receiving from the manufacturer to store in your cold storage, that's an interface. And there are strict requirements there between receiving and storage. For example, you don't need to allow the temperature abuse there. If the product is chilled, you don't need to offload it and keep it in an area where it's not temperature compliant for any certain amount of time. And also, when you are transporting and handling to the customer, on the routes also, those are interfaces where you need to comply strictly with adherence, for example, to the transportation requirements, including the temperature compliance. So those are the tasks globally the global cold chain organizations do. They receive from manufacturer, they store the product in their warehouses, and they manage the handle during the time the product is in their warehouse. Then they transport it to the customer or consumers, and the product is remaining within their responsibility during this time. So organizations are legally responsible for the food safety outcomes while products are in their control. Once you receive it, until you hand it over to the end user. So even if you are not producing or manufacturing, you are required to be responsible for the safety. And in New Zealand context also, this is reinforced under MPI Food Act of 2014, which stipulates these responsibilities. And definitely you need to check with your regulations, but mainly the responsibility is yours, is enforced not only by standards, but also by your local authorities. Now let's look at the key activities in cold chain organizations. First, you have receiving, the DAC operations and incoming temperature verifications, ensuring compliance with food safety regulations in your own jurisdiction. And for instance, in New Zealand, this includes compliance with Food Act of 2014 and MPI food safety programs requirements. And then the storage also is an activity for cold chain. And here it requires you to maintain temperature controlled environment for chill and frozen zones to national or international standards, to maintain that based on those requirements. And this is crucial for food integrity. And in New Zealand context, this involves adherence to New Zealand standards as mandated by MPI. And then also you have picking. During your order picking, selection and consolidation of customer orders with operations adherence to occupational health and safety guidelines is also a requirement and is your responsibility as a cold chain organization. And for instance, in New Zealand again, This includes WorkSafe New Zealand guidelines under Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015, and you need to comply by those requirements. And the fifth activity by the cold chain is dispatching, loading and transport coordination, maintaining temperature integrity across diverse climates is also a mandatory requirement to sustain the safety of the product. For example, in New Zealand, this often involves coordination for major retailers like Foodstuff and Woolworth New Zealand across various New Zealand climates. And then the fifth activity in the cold chain organization is cross-docking. That means short-term holding and rapid transfer operations, with critical handovers managed under relevant food safety and occupational health and safety provisions, which we need to comply with. Again, your local regulatory requirements, you need to comply even during cross-docking. And in New Zealand context, this must align with Food Act of 2014 and Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 provisions. The risks that are relevant at every stage here, each activity introduces food safety, quality, and worker risk unique to its operational context. All right? During receiving and during storage and order picking and dispatching and cross-docking, all these, each activity has their own risks. For example, in picking, there are risks for the workers to not pick heavy load that is above the guidelines, or to adhere to picking the right products, and also to maintain the FIFO, first in, first out, or first expired, first out guidelines. So each activity has their own relevant risk that we need to maintain. And this must be systematically controlled and monitored in line with global best practices and ISO standards. All right. Again, in example for New Zealand context, this includes compliance with MPI's Food Act of 2014 regulations and WorkSafe New Zealand's Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015. All right. The key stakeholders and risk exposure in cold chain operations. First, we have customers. Our customers here in cold chain operations are manufacturers and exporters and retail chains. They depend on our temperature integrity and service liability in cold chain operations here. All right, so we need to adhere to their requirements. In New Zealand example, this includes major New Zealand retail chains like Foodstuff and Woolworth New Zealand operating across Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then we have consumers also. It's our responsibility to make sure we analyze their requirements and we meet their requirements. Downstream recipients of the products is stored and transported under our control in cold chain operations is our responsibility. Example, in New Zealand, this applies to consumers throughout the New Zealand. And in your context, it could be throughout your country. And also workers are the interested parties that we have obligations and responsibility to adhere to based on the international standards and also local regulatory and national regulatory requirements. Operators are exposed to health hazards such as forklifts, right? That's a hazard. And cold environment or hot environment in some areas, for example, in Middle East. All right. And physical demand also, like we said earlier, the load limits, and safety governed by local health and safety legislation and approved code of practice. So we need to adhere to that. The hazards of such as forklift, cold or hot environment, and physical demand, and we must comply with the local and national legislation and approved code of practice. In New Zealand context, safety is governed by Health and Safety Act of 2015 and WorkSafe New Zealand's approved code of practice. So this requires us also to have awareness with our local legislation's requirements. And then we have regulators as our also interested parties in cold chain operations. Authorities monitor operations for compliance with local food safety, occupational health, and environmental legislations. And this is applicable for where you are. For instance, in New Zealand, these include MPI or Ministry for Primary Industries, WorkSafe New Zealand, and EPA or Environmental Protection Authority, ensuring compliance with legislation such as the Food Act of 2014, Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015, and Resources Management Act of 1991, and Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996. So we need to comply with all the regulatory requirements in our own local jurisdictions. And then we have communities also are our interested parties that are exposed to the risk of our operations. We have local stakeholders are concerned with refrigerants, energy use, and environmental impact as per local legislations or local regulations and community expectations. So we need also to analyze in our context to meet the expectations of the communities around us. In New Zealand example, these include adhering to New Zealand's specific environmental regulations and community expectations. So auditors, just for our awareness, globally assess risk ownership and not product ownership. And this is not a manufacturing, it's a cold chain environment or cold chains operations. So they will assess the risk ownership. Your responsibility extends across every stakeholder group that we mentioned. An example in New Zealand again, this principle is consistently applied by auditors in Aotearoa, New Zealand, of assessing the risk ownership instead of product ownership. And that's the difference between cold chain organizations, the scope of assessment, and the manufacturing scope of assessment. Now, let's talk about the definition of the scope, since we mentioned the scope. And this is a major stage one risk. It needs to be comprehensive, accurate, and relevant, and updated as well. And for cold chain storage and logistics organizations, the certification scope must clearly and accurately define all activities under the organization's control. All the activities under the organization's control must accurately and clearly define in your scope. And misalignment between the documented scope and actual operation is a frequent cause of stage one audit deferral in certification contexts worldwide. So you see, it's one of the measures of the deferral, where the auditor will come and tell you, no, you are not ready. Usually is related to the scope. So you must make sure that your scope is accurate and clear with the definition of all the activities. And we are going to show you the example also of how to draft a scope in the cold chain. Now, should include the storage type. It should be explicit. Explicitly state ambient or chill between 0 to 5 degrees Celsius and frozen with minus 18 degrees Celsius or colder. Storage capabilities. So you must be explicit with your storage capabilities, aligning with relevant food safety regulations and industry best practices. An example here in New Zealand, these include compliance with New Zealand Food Safety Act or Food Act of 2014 requirement. And then you must also cover the transportation activities to clearly specify the owned vehicle versus subcontracted transport arrangements. You must also state this in your scope. And note the compliance with national transport regulations and food safety legislations as well. You need to include that in your scope. An example in the New Zealand context, this involves compliance with NZTA regulations and MPI Food Act of 2014, transport clauses across New Zealand's North and South Island. And also, you must cover the seasonal operations. You must include temporary storage and peak season operations or operational changes, and how these adhere to national safety program standards. And some organizations would exclude the temporary storage, but that's a major non-conformance. So you need to include your temporary and peak seasonal operational storage. Example now in New Zealand, this includes considerations for seasons like kiwi fruits or dairy export season, adhering to MPI food safety program standards. And for the exclusion also, any exclusion must be defendable and documented with clear rationale, particularly regarding hazardous substances or new organisms that fall under relevant national guidelines. Unjustified exclusion also is a reason for deferral of stage 2. That means if the auditor come and found you did exclusion from your stage that are unjustified, is a major non-conformance, and they will say you are not ready for stage 2. Now, those are the common failure worldwide that you need to avoid. When transport is excluded from scope while its dispatching activities remain under direct control, or there is a lack of clear documentation for compliance with national occupational health and safety acts during these operations. This is a common failure, and now you have it, you have the information, you can avoid that when exclusion of the transportation is noted in your scope. Now, in New Zealand context example, lack of clear documentation for compliance with New Zealand's Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015, it would be considered a failure of your scope statement. This is the ideal scope example that you can draft yours in a similar fashion. And a well-defined scope statement clearly describe what service your organizations provide to whom and under what conditions. Like we said earlier, it must align with your actual operations and certification standards relevant to the local regulations environment. For instance, in New Zealand again, this includes adherence to the New Zealand Food Act of 2014 and MPI requirements. If we look at the example draft here, in the New Zealand context that you can replicate in your own country. This scope statement starts with temperature-controlled storage and distribution of chilled and frozen food products for retail and food service customers throughout New Zealand. And the service include receipt, inspection, and storage of customer-owned food products at minus 25 degrees Celsius to 5 degrees Celsius. For example, in compliance with MPI Food Act of 2014 requirements in New Zealand. So in your context, it must be in compliance with your applicable regulations in your country. That's the first service included. The second service included order picking, packing, and dispatch operations, for example, under WorkSafe New Zealand guidelines. So you see, also when you state the physical activities that involve the workers, it must be in compliance or under guidelines with the occupational health and safety guidelines in your country. And the third service included outbound transport coordination using approved third-party carriers, for example, adhering to New Zealand transport regulations. So when you mention also the third party, it must be adhering to your local regulations. All right? And then the fourth service, real-time inventory management and temperature monitoring. And this is very critical, the temperature monitoring here. You have to mention it in your scope, and it must be done in real time. All right? So you include all the services that way. And now, when we talk about exclusion, it must be justified. So if you see the exclusions here, food manufacturing, processing, or packing activities are excluded. And direct import and export customers clearance is excluded. And long-term contract storage exceeding 12 months also is excluded. And hazardous substances or non-food products, for example, as defined by the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996 in New Zealand, is also excluded. So the exclusion must make sense and must be justifiable. The key elements here of storage, this is also part of your scope, you must state. Key element of strong scope statement. All right? Just take note of this so that you can construct your statement. The temperature range you actually operate must be mentioned. And clear service boundaries, what you do and what you don't do. So you need to include in your statement, you need to state the inclusion and exclusion. To put the boundaries, what you do and what you don't do. And also the geographic coverage of your activities must be included. If you expand, you must then update. Those are the updates we talk about in scope updates. So you must state exactly your geographical locations. And customer type served also. Here we mentioned foodstuff or Woolworth. So you must also mention the customer types. And specific exclusion to prevent misunderstanding, referencing relevant local legislation, right? For example, here we mentioned that New Zealand's HSNO Act of 1996, right? So you need to also reference your local regulations. And alignment with your operational capabilities and local food safety programs. For example, in New Zealand context, MPI food safety programs in New Zealand. All right? That's how you can construct a scope that will never fail in your stage one. and all the stages actually. Now, let's cover the ISO 9001 in this part. And we will start by defining quality in cold chain logistics, and then we will give you the checklist of all the documents you need to prepare. And also we will talk about the stage 1 and stage 2. Now, this is quality definition in the context of cold chain logistics. In cold chain, quality is not about addressing product defects. Get this right, okay? It is fundamentally about delivering excellent service. That's the context of the quality in cold chain. It's not about the defects. It's not about, high protein or high foreign matters. It's all about delivering the excellent service. Failing on quality erodes customer trust here. So you must maintain excellent quality. If you don't have quality standards and quality operations, it will erode customer trust. And it will jeopardizes your contracts also with your customers. And your customers are the manufacturers mainly. That's what we are talking about here. And also your consumers and your workers and the regulations. All these are your customers. So if you don't maintain the quality, it will jeopardize your contracts and also erode the trust and risk compliance with regulatory bodies. All right. And for instance, in New Zealand context, these include regulatories like Ministry of Primary Industries. So here you must maintain, when we talk about the excellent service include on-time delivery to meet agreed delivery window to avoid duct congestion and protecting products shelf life, like we said earlier, by minimizing transit time, which we call interface, and ensuring customers can meet their own production schedules. And also, you must maintain in full delivery, delivering exactly what was ordered. No wrong orders, no more, no less. All right? And preventing stock out and lost sales for clients also, and reducing the need for costly catch-up deliveries. And also you must maintain temperature compliance, maintaining the strict cold chain from pick up to drop off, and continuous monitoring to guarantee product safety during your transportation as well. During your transportation from your storage to the customer, you must maintain a strict adherence to temperature and preventing bacterial growth and premature spoilage. And no damage or contamination. Handling goods with care to prevent crash or torn packing in your warehouse, and also during the transportation and during handling. And maintaining clean, hygienic environments to stop cross-contamination in the warehouse, during the transportation, and during the handling, and ensuring the products looks good as it did at the factory. All right? And also, the last part of maintaining the excellent quality is accurate documentation, providing clear digital proof of temperature and timing, and simplifying the audit process for local and international regulators. Here we are talking, for example, MPI in New Zealand, and giving customers total confidence in record keeping. If you maintain these 5 points, you are maintaining excellence of service. I will show you now all the documents you need to maintain them. Now, quality policy also is crucial. And this is an example. Okay. Quality policy must be more than generic statement. It should reflect actual business priorities. Okay. I have seen some quality policies that were the reason for major non-conformances. They were generic, copied from other templates without tailoring them to, or they were given by consultant who is not familiar even with the processes. Now, it should reflect actual business priorities, demonstrate leadership commitment, and guide daily decision making in cold chain operations. Your quality policy should do that. It also helps an organization meet ISO 9001 certification requirements. All right. Now, this is an example that you can scan your policy against and see if there are some improvements you should do. Quality policy start by stating with your company and you continue. We are committed to delivering reliable, temperature controlled storage and logistics services that protect food safety and meet our customers' exact requirements globally. And for instance, again in New Zealand, this includes serving major retail chains like Foodstuff and Woolworth across Aotearoa, New Zealand. And then you state your commitments in your quality policy. Here, our commitment to maintain continuous temperature controls throughout all storage and handling operations, aligning with international cold chain best practices, comply with all applicable food safety, health and safety, and environmental regulations. And for example, in New Zealand, you when you state, it shouldn't be just generic, like complying with all applicable food safety and health and safety and environmental regulations. You should specify. So now, for example, in New Zealand, comply with all applicable food safety and health and safety and environmental regulations in New Zealand, including the Ministry for Primary Industry MPI, Food Act 2014, and Food Safety Programs requirements, and WorkSafe New Zealand Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015, and relevant approved code of practice, and Environmental Protection Authority EPA, and Resources Management Act of 1991, and Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996. That's the commitment. You state all the applicable regulations. That's what we said earlier, that it should not be generic. All right? Now, the third commitment, to provide accurate, real-time information to customers about their inventory and shipments, facilitating transparent operations. And you must state also the operation across geographical locations. In New Zealand context here, this includes operations across both the North and South Islands. Then you continue with your commitment statements. We invest in our people through training, engagement, and safe working conditions, fostering a culture of quality throughout our organization. And this statement must have evidence also. The evidence of how are you fostering the culture of the culture of quality. It must be demonstrable in your operations. Open communication, encouragement for the feedback and near misses reporting, celebration of, you celebrate those or award those who practice the quality. And also you provide the training and you foster the culture of collaboration and so on. and awareness, all right? So it must be demonstrable. And then the other statement, you continue with your statements. Continuously improve our system through data analysis, customer feedback and operations reviews, and maintaining our commitment to ISO standards requirements, which will also be proven through the audit, observations, and verifications. And you continue with your commitment. We will minimize our environmental impact through energy efficiency and waste reduction, which this one also like you should have, which is a requirement to have the impact analysis. All right. If you need exactly how to conduct the impact analysis, we also have the courses on our YouTube channel. Now, to continue with minimize our environmental impact through energy efficiency and waste reduction. Yes, let me stop the phone here. We continue with the statement. Minimize our environmental impact through energy efficiency and waste reduction, contributing positively to sustainability goals globally. And this also must be demonstrable with your data, with your analysis, with your waste management, visibility through observation and verification. In New Zealand context, this means contributing positively to New Zealand's sustainability goals. And you continue with your scope statement. Every team member is responsible for quality, safety, and environmental performance. Management provides the resources, training, and support needed to achieve these commitments. And those must be facts. This policy is reviewed annually and communicated to all staff, contractors, and relevant stakeholders. Right. Now, if we look at what makes this statement strong, it is specific to cold chain operations, like temperature control and real-time information, with example relevant to specific customers. So you need to include specific customers. And it addresses all relevant management systems like quality, safety, food safety, health and safety, and environmental management, including compliance with the local legislations. For instance, like we mentioned in New Zealand, this includes MPI and WorkSafe and EPA requirements. And it includes measurable commitment like continuous temperature controls and regulatory compliance. And it assigns clear responsibility to both management and staff, reflecting a robust organizational culture. And it commits to improvement and review, aligning with ISO standards audit practices relevant to business worldwide, including those in New Zealand. And it is written in plain language that operations staff can understand and apply in various regions, including across New Zealand. So those are the elements that will make your policy strong. Now, let's look at Class 4 of ISO 9001, or Class 4 in general, the context and leadership. Understanding your service context means knowing your customer's exact requirements, regular regulatory obligations, and operational constraints. So leadership must be visible and accountable and not confined in offices during business hours. Leadership visibility is a requirement by all the standards. So for instance, in New Zealand, this includes compliance with local regulatory obligations. The customer requirement, for instance, for leadership commitment and visibility is to have clear understanding of SLA or service level agreements and temperature specifications and delivery window. All right. Example in New Zealand, this applies to major retailers like Foodstuff and Woolworths, New Zealand. And operational leaders must be present and engaged in operational decisions and not only strategic planning. And also shift handover. Accountability must be maintained across all shifts, including night shifts and weekend shifts. Failure patterns here related to contracts and leadership. Leadership absence from operational decisions, and particularly during non-standard hours, is also considered a failure. Let's look at clause 6 for the risk planning. Risk-based planning in cold chain logistics demands anticipating and preparing for operational disruptions in accordance with relevant local and food safety and occupational health and safety regulations. Okay? So you must have a risk-based planning, which we will demonstrate now. That must be relevant to your local regulations, requirements. For instance, in New Zealand, this must be relevant in accordance to MPI food safety programs and WorkSafe New Zealand guidelines. And controls must be documented, regularly practiced, and embedded into daily operations to ensure compliance and prevent significant breaches rather than remaining theoretical exercises. Those are the risk-based thinking practices that we must design and keep in mind and practice it. For example, temperature excursion. We must develop risk scenarios such as equipment failure, cold room left open, for example, or refrigerant leaks impacting compliance with required temperature standards for the chilled and frozen goods. That means in our risk analysis, we develop scenarios in case this equipment fail, or in case the cold room is left open, or in case our refrigerant leaks. What do? We ask those questions and we develop control measures, corrective actions, and preventive actions. That's the risk-based thinking in compliance with regulatory requirements in our jurisdictions. And for example, in New Zealand, this includes MPI temperature standards. So you need to apply your local applicable standards. Also for equipment failure, same thing. Breakdown of forklift, racking collapse, or conveyor system malfunctioning, necessitating adherence to local occupational health and safety regulations. Okay? So for this risk-based thinking, we also have to think in that trajectory. In case of forklift failure or the racking system collapse or conveyor system is malfunctioning, what do we do to make sure that we adhere to health and safety regulations in our own country to protect the workers and to protect the business? And then we put the control measures also in place before it happened. So in case it's about to happen, like for example, preventive maintenance for the forklift, or daily check before they started, or making sure the staff are trained, like the forklift operator, making sure the racking system also is not overloaded and it is also checked, and we put the barriers around the racking system to not be hit by the moving objects to collapse. All these are examples of the measures that you need to think about the scenario, you analyze it based on the data, and then you apply the control measures to prevent the failure. And this in New Zealand involve the Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 and relevant WorkSafe approved code of practice. And all our regulations provide the guidelines of what we need to do for the risk-based thinking to make sure we maintain the safety and health, occupational health and safety in workplace. Thirdly, you have transport delays. It's something you need to consider in risk-based thinking, analyze it, and prevent it also. Disruptions due to vehicle breakdown, for example, on challenging routes. All right? For example, in New Zealand context between North and South Islands in New Zealand, or severe weather events, or drivers' unavailability affecting delivery schedules for major retailers. So you need to come up with all these scenarios also based on the industry. Definitely, there are references you need to use, and you build the scenarios and you apply preventive measures and corrective actions in adherence to, again, requirements. And then we have also the peak season overload, the capacity constraints during key export peaks in New Zealand, like during kiwi fruits, meats, dairy in New Zealand, or seasonal domestic demand surge, requiring robust planning to meet service level agreements while ensuring product integrity. In other regions, it could be, like there are peak seasons in many other ways. Could be Christmas, could be Ramadan, could be something that you need to plan for it and make sure how it could be like the tourism, the tourism season. So you must also plan in a risk-based thinking. Now let's have an overview on the cloud's operations. Continue with the overview, and then we will definitely go to the checklist to see all the required documents. Now, the control points here. Operational controls form the backbone of a quality management system in cold storage and logistics organization. And these controls must function reliably during all operational hours, including night shifts, peak periods, and when direct supervision is unavailable, especially night shifts. So here you need a rigorous receiving checks, inspection notes, dispatch notes need to be rigorous. And temperature verification, also very important to verify the temperature and make sure we don't abuse the temperature throughout our operations. Aligning with relevant food safety requirements. This is always have to be in mind. You need to align with local legislations, local regulations, to make sure you align with them 100%. So for instance, in New Zealand example, we must align with MPI compliance and Food Act 2014 requirements. The other control is continuous temperature monitoring systems meeting relevant industry standards in cold chain operations. And standards are issued mainly by your national regulations that you need to adhere to. In New Zealand example, we need to adhere to standards number 5807 of 2018 in New Zealand. The other control that you must maintain in cold chain storage is strict segregation rules for all allergen and different products type. In New Zealand, these are enforced under the Food Act of 2014 and MPI food safety programs. So also you must make sure you are familiar with your local regulations and adhere to them. The other control is clear alarm response procedure and escalation protocol with emergency preparedness planning. And this is a mandatory requirement almost everywhere around the world, that you must make sure you have clear alarm response procedure, whether it's alarm for temperature excursion or alarm for any type of emergency. You must have a procedure of how to respond to it and what to do about it. For example, in New Zealand, This aligns with WorkSafe New Zealand guidelines for hazardous substances and emergency preparedness. And the other control we need to maintain is a thorough loading and dispatch verification processes, ensuring regulatory compliance with product integrity. We need to ensure with our also local compliance. In New Zealand, this includes adherence to New Zealand Transport Agency regulations. So those are the controls that are the backbone of our quality management system in cold storage and logistics operation that we must maintain. All right. Now, the auditor focus here when it comes in relation to operations. Certification bodies and authorities verify real-world operational performance, focusing on what happened under challenging conditions rather than just documented procedure. So they will ask questions like what happened at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., when the temperature excursion happened and the alarm go off. What do you do right there? Right? You must respond with evidence, such as having backup generators or having technician in place or having a text system where the automated text, where if the temperature deviate, the automatic text will be sent to, for example, security will be sent to quality manager, will be sent to maintenance manager, and will be sent, for example, to operational director automatically. An alarm will go on so that the correction should be done. Look, this example I'm giving you, let's say your temperature is set at minus 18 as the requirement, minus 18. But you are maintaining at minus, let's say, 20. And you are observing the trend. So if you are analyzing the trend, you set it at minus 20, but the required is minus 18, let's say. If you set it at minus 20, and then you are observing the trend, and the trend is moving from minus 20 to minus 19, tick by tick, like gradually, that means when you analyze the trend, you can catch it there and you can fix it before temperature excursion happen. That's the benefit of trend analysis. The other thing also happen, you can set your alarm at minus 18.5. If the temperature reach minus 18.5 for 5 minutes, the text should go out automatically and the alarm should be triggered. And that text actions must be taken within a specified time. That will be a procedure. Okay? That's the procedure of emergency preparedness you need to do. So if that happened at 3 a.m. and you have security on site and a maintenance technician there and a backup generator or either of them, whatever, based on your capabilities, but in adherence with the local regulations, if the alarm go on there and nobody is taking action within 5 minutes, for example, some actions need to be defined to be taken there also. Like if the backup generator or the maintenance person are engaged in something else or nobody is there during the holiday, for example, what are the alternatives? Like that product should be taken to the call to a different location, for instance, which is maintaining the temperature until the fix happen. So you need to come up with solutions, and there are guidelines that, in every scenario we can fix it for you. If you have any question, just drop it in the comment below and I will help you with your emergency preparedness, whatever scenario is. All right. Now, here with the example in New Zealand, auditors might specifically verify what happened at 2 a.m. at major distribution center like like what I said, to ensure consistent compliance. All right. So that's the operations. Now let's look at let's have an overview also of class 9 and class 10. Just a second. Nope. Just give me a second, guys. I will get back to you now. Now let's look at class 10, performance improvement. Performance monitoring extend beyond simple metrics here in cold chain. For cold storage and logistics operations, it requires meaningful analysis that drives systematic improvement, ensuring compliance with local legislations and industry best practices rather than merely implementing reactive fixes to recurring issues. And we do have 3 key performance indicators, KPIs here. Those KPIs include customer complaints, temperature deviation trends in the cold chain, like we said earlier, corrective actions, effectiveness, and energy consumption metrics. And organizations must align these with relevant regulatory requirements. Always, you must align your indicators with regulatory requirements. And for example, in New Zealand, customer complaints are aligned with Food Act of 2014, and corrective actions often follow guidelines such as those from WorkSafe New Zealand. If we look at these indicators, first, we must have evidence requirements. And evidence includes recorded customer complaints with thorough root cause analysis and preventive actions. Not just filing the complaints. We need to analyze the root causes also. And these actions must meet applicable food safety programs, expectations. And for example, in New Zealand, this align with MPI food safety program expectations. All right. So if customers complain, for instance, that the temperature log during the transportation is quoted for 5 minutes, the temperature deviate for 5 minutes. You need to analyze the root cause. Why did the temperature deviate for 5 minutes during the transportation? Then, for instances, if you analyze and you found out that there are 4 drops on your delivery, drop off, like your driver has to drop the deliveries for 4 customers along the way. While dropping for 4 customers, let's say for the 3rd customer, your driver left the door open after offloading for longer than usual. And that caused the temperature deviation, for example, as per your investigation. If you found that's the case, then you need to train your drivers for the limit. Like if you, let's say, for example, part of the investigation also, you found out that the driver left the door open while handling the documentation. So now the drivers need to be retrained to first close the doors of the refrigerator before handling the documentation. So they can offload, close the refrigerator, then go to handle the documentation. This is an example. So always the root cause must be analyzed and apply preventive action to make sure it never happen for the same reason again. All right. Then for the trend analysis, we already demonstrated the example earlier with what happened at 2 a.m. Regular review of temperature excursion patterns across distribution networks is crucial for identifying systematic issues and ensuring adherence to cold chain standards. And for example, in New Zealand, this would involve reviewing patterns in North and South Island distribution. And thirdly, we have systematic change for operations. Improvement must demonstrate system change. You see, this is what we said earlier with both examples. Across the organizations, ensuring robust solutions rather than repeated fixes to identical problems. You see, we don't need identical problems to happen. For the same reason, we need to apply preventive measures always to make sure that elimination, okay? For instance, this applies to organizations for retail chains such as our bigger customers that we can name in New Zealand context, for example. All right, those are an overview of some clauses. Now, let's look at the checklist of all the documentation you need and the evidences you need to provide for the auditor. And this checklist details the key requirements, documentations, and audit evidence for ISO 9001 clauses. This is tailored for cold chain and logistics operations globally. But we are giving a specific example of New Zealand, and this is recorded in February 2026. So in the future, when you come across this course, you should check for the latest updates. Now, if we look at clause 4.1, the requirement is to determine the external and internal issues. And the requirement here is to conduct environmental context analysis. All right? And the document that is reviewed is required here is to have first the context analysis document, and also the records of annual reviews must be retained for 3 years. The auditor here will come and check your organization to validate or to verify that the issues have been identified, including customer requirements, for example, major retailers, and regulatory obligations have been identified, and cold chain technology changes are also being identified, and monitoring capabilities issues are also being identified. For example, here in New Zealand context, customer requirements like Foodstuffs or Woolworths New Zealand and regulatory obligations to RMA 1991 or HSNO Act of 1996 and competitor capabilities is specific to New Zealand markets. So always the competitor capabilities must be analyzed. So that's the requirement for class 4.1, to have context analysis along with the review records. Then in class 4.2, it requires you to determine interested parties and requirements. And here we must create a document for interested party register. All right? And this interested parties register, we must definitely identify all the interested parties with their expectations, review this document annually, and update it to be relevant to the current situation. Auditor will come to verify that customers, for example, the manufacturers, exporters, and retailers, and regulators, and employees, and subcontractors are identified with expectations. For example, in New Zealand context, customers like New Zealand manufacturers and exporters and retailers like Foodstuff and Woolworths New Zealand, and regulators like MPI and WorkSafe and New Zealand and EPA, all must be identified with their expectations and always work to meet their expectations. And then in class 4.3, it requires you to determine the scope of the QMS, what we did earlier. So we are not going to spend a lot of time here. You just need the scope statement, but it's mandatory requirement. You must have a scope, and you must retain it for the life of the certifications. And you must, in your scope, the auditor will need the evidence that all the sites and activities are being covered, and the services also. And we already give an example, so we will not spend more time here. And class 4.4, we need to establish, implement, and maintain quality management system. And here in class 4.4, it requires us to create a process map and have it. All right? And with the process map, we need to keep process records and retain them for the duration of 3 years. Auditor will verify that cold chain processes are identified and controlled. That's what the auditor will do, including temperature monitoring and stock rotation and dispatch verifications in alignment with industry best practices. In New Zealand, this must adhere to New Zealand cold storage standards. That's class 4. Now, if we move to class 5, the leadership and commitment requirements here is to have evidence to be demonstrated through actions, not on the documentation only, but through the actions. And we must have evidence of the leadership engagement, such as being on the shop floor, such as taking actions and making decisions. And those evidence, we keep them for 3 years. An auditor will come to verify that management takes accountability for service quality and customer satisfaction and resources provisions and shift coverage and adherence to relevant regulations. And in class 5.2, requirement is to establish quality policy. Again, we demonstrate this. We must have quality policy, and this is mandatory requirement, and we must retain it for the duration of the certification. The auditor will verify the commitment to meet customers' temperature requirements and comply with local food safety regulations and continuous improvement. In New Zealand context, this must be verified that it's in compliance with Food Act 2014 and MPI food safety programs. And also you must replicate that with your local jurisdiction, like we said earlier. In class 5.3, it requires you to assign roles, responsibilities, and authorities. And that means you need to create a document for organizational chart. You need to have it. And you need to have responsibilities metrics. And you need to keep the assignment records, retain them for the duration of the employees. Any employee that has been assigned in your organizational chart or responsibilities metrics, their records must be kept for the duration of 3 years, duration of their employment plus 3 years afterward. Here, the auditor also will need the evidence that quality responsibilities have been assigned, such as QA manager, shift supervisors, warehouse operators, and communicated. Also, these responsibilities must be communicated, especially concerning health and safety. All right? And in New Zealand context, this is especially concerning New Zealand health and safety. That's class 5. Class 6 requirement, it wants you to take actions to address risk and opportunities. And here you need to create a risk register specific for cold chain storage. Risk register, you need to have it. And also you need to have the documents review of the risk register that is done annually. The auditor will come here to, when the auditor comes, they will verify that the risks are identified, including temperature excursion, equipment failure, powder outage, contamination, mislabeling, and delivering delay. All right, so those must be included in your risk register. An example in New Zealand context here, the power outage considering New Zealand electricity grid and delivery delay within New Zealand. So you need to include those in your risk register. And then in clause 6.2, it requires quality objectives and planning. And this is a mandatory requirement to have objectives set, right? KPIs to be also included. Now, this is a mandatory requirement to have quality objectives and also the monitoring of your objectives progress. You need to monitor and to keep the records of those monitoring for the duration of 3 years. Mandatory requirement also. And the auditor need evidence that your objectives are smart and measurable. For example, temperature compliance. We will achieve temperature compliance for 1999, 19.5% for the next 12 months. So they need evidence of monitoring. On-time delivery, 98%. They also need evidence. Zero contamination incidents and customer complaints for the last 2 months. They also need evidence. Example, in New Zealand here, on-time delivery across New Zealand to be 98%. If you state or in your country to be 98%, they also need evidence of monitoring and the objectives. So that's clause 6. Now, if we move to clause 7, clause 7.1 requires you to determine and provide resources. And you need here to have a document for resource plans and also keep the records of any resource obtained for the duration of 3 years. Auditors here will need evidence that adequate resources, including refrigeration equipment, forklifts, temperature monitoring systems, trainee staff for all the shifts adhering to local and safeguard guidelines have been provided. So you need to have evidence. An example here, in New Zealand context, this must be adhering to New Zealand WorkSafe guidelines. So you need also to be adhering to your local jurisdiction guidelines. Clause 7.2 requires you to determine competence and ensure competence. So that means you need to have a document also for competence metrics. And with this competence metrics, you need to obtain evidence of your training, including training records, all the type of records, and keep them again for the duration of the employment of anybody who has been trained or who has been listed in competence metrics for the duration of their employment plus 7 years. This is the requirement. The auditor here will come to confirm and need evidence that competent requirements have been defined for forklift operators within relevant certifications as required by your local jurisdiction or regulatory, and call room staff, food handler training also as required by your local regulatory, and dispatch coordinators. And training is provided and verified against local standards. So that must be that. Training also must be verified by the local standards. Now, example here, in New Zealand, the forklift operators with New Zealand occupational health and safety certifications must be there. The call room staff with MPI food handlers training, the evidence must be there. And training must be verified against New Zealand standards. So this you need to replicate in your own regulatory requirements. If you move to clause 7.3, it requires you to ensure awareness. And again here, you need to have documentations and materials for awareness training and keep awareness records, retain them for 3 years. Auditors here will need evidence through observation, through reviews, through records, evidence that workers are aware of quality policy, of temperature requirements, their contribution to food safety, and consequences of non-conformance. So they will ask workers, all right, what will happen if this non-conformance happen? They need to explain also the consequences. So you need to make sure you have the evidence of the training materials and awareness records and retain them for 3 years. And also must comply with your local regulatory requirements. Example, in New Zealand, the awareness of New Zealand temperature requirements and their contributions to food safety must comply with Food Act of 2014. Now, in clause 4.7, it requires you to determine communications. That means you also need to have communication plan documented and communication records. All the means you use as a systematic way of communicating, you need to keep all these records and evidence of communications for 3 years retention period. The auditors here will come to confirm the evidence of systematic communication exists, such as for shift handovers. How does the communication happen? Must be recorded. And customer notifications, delays or excursions, in case it happen, it must be documented. And management review incorporating regulatory updates. All this also must be recorded. And adherence to New Zealand's requirements also. To your regulatory requirements. Now, an example of New Zealand here, New Zealand customers' notifications for delays and excursion, the evidence must be there. And management review incorporating New Zealand regulatory updates, also evidence must be there. All right. And then in class 7.5, it requires you to control the documented information. That means it requires you to create a procedure or procedures for documents and records control. So you must have a procedure to control the versions, to control the documents, all type of documents. And those records of controlling the documents must be retained for 3 years also. The auditor will come to confirm and need evidence that documents are controlled, such as version control approvals. And records are retained per statutory and customer requirements as per the state, like regulatory requirements and customer requirements, and accessible to relevant staff. An example of New Zealand context here, the records are retained per New Zealand statutory and customer requirements. So you need to check with your statutory requirements. That's class 7. Now let's move to class 8. And we start with class 8.1. For operational planning and controls, it requires you here to create procedures for operational control. All the applicable procedures. And you need also to retain those procedures along with process control records, process records for 3 years. The auditor need evidence that controls are established. For example, the receiving inspection is a type of control. The temperature monitor is a control. The FIFO or first in, first out, or first expiry, first out is also a control. Pre-dispatch checks is also a control. Vehicle temperature verification is also a control. So you need all this evidence must be recorded and retained for 3 years. Not only for the auditor, all the evidence I'm giving you now will be required by all the type of audits, not only certification audits, from regulatory, from customer, from anywhere that is coming to audit your facility will require these documents. And that's why you need to keep them for 3 years. Example in New Zealand context for this point, the pre-dispatch checks for New Zealand distributions and vehicle temperature verifications must be available. In clause 8.2, it's the requirements for products and services, and it requires you again here to create procedure for customer requirements. And this is very important. You must have procedure for customer requirements, and you must have customer agreements and retain them for the duration of your relationship with the customer, plus 7 years after. The auditors will verify and need evidence that customer requirements are documented. And we talked about customers earlier, all type of customers. Customer requirements are documented, including temperature range, storage durations, handling inspections. For example, food safety approved and delivery schedules. All these must be documented, and the auditors will need evidence. For example, in New Zealand context, handling instructions and, for example, MPI approved handling instructions must be there. And in clause 8.7, the requirements is the design and development, if applicable, the design and development, okay? Design control procedure will be required if applicable, and the design records must be maintained for the life of the products. But this is not applicable here for most cold storage operations. You don't design, right? Do you have R&D to design the products? Most cases, no. All right. Now, for clause 8.4, the control of externally provided processes is a requirement here. And here it requires you to create procedure for supplier approval. And also to have approved supplier list. All these documents are required. And also you must have supplier evaluation documents for each and every supplier that is on the list. And you retain those documents for 3 years. The auditors will come to confirm the evidence that subcontracted transports are approved and monitored, and maintenance contractors are qualified. The contractors who will come to do maintenance are qualified, and calibration services also are accredited. So you need all this evidence. The qualifications of the maintenance staff, the subcontractors transport, the certification for so you evaluate each and every one of them, and when you approve in the list, you need all the records and retain them for 3 years. Here in New Zealand context, example, subcontracted New Zealand transport must be approved and maintained, and maintenance contractors also must be qualified per the standards of New Zealand, and calibration services must be accredited in New Zealand. For example, IANZ accreditation. And then in class 8.5, the requirement here is for production and service provision. Here you must have work instructions documented, including receiving, storage, and dispatch, all type of work instructions. And you need production records and keep them for 3 years retention period. The auditors will come and need evidence for controlled conditions, such as temperature. It must be maintained, for example, under minus 18 degrees Celsius for frozen. Traceability is maintained, product protection is maintained, and validated processes for food safety. And for example, New Zealand, here, validated processes for New Zealand food safety must be maintained. Then in clause 8.6, the requirements here is the release of the products and services. And here, the standard is requiring you to have procedure for the release. And you must have release records, mandatory to keep them for 3 years, the release records. Auditor will verify the pre-dispatch verifications, including temperature compliance must be verified, correct products and quantities, and vehicle temperature must be acceptable, and documentation also must be complete. The auditor will need evidence for all that. An example here in New Zealand, the vehicle temperature must be acceptable for New Zealand conditions. And then in clause 8.7, the requirements here is for the control of the non-conforming outputs. And here it requires you to create a procedure for non-conformance. And with this procedure, it's mandatory to keep the records of non-conformance for 3 years, mandatory requirement. Auditors will need evidence for temperature excursion quarantine here, and customer must be notified and decision must be made, including either to release the product or rework the product or scrap the product in case of non-conformance. All the evidence are needed here, and the root cause must be investigated in accordance with local food safety guidelines. Also need evidence. And in case of in New Zealand example here, the root cause must be investigated in accordance with the MPI guidelines. That is clause 8. Now we move to clause 9 for the cold storage requirements or cold chain organization requirements. Clause 9.1, monitoring the requirements for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. So here it's telling you clearly just have document for monitoring plan. And with this monitoring plan, you need to have monitoring records. An auditor will come to verify the performance are monitored, including temperature compliance, on-time delivery, customer satisfactions, complaints, and non-conformances. For example, in New Zealand context, on-time delivery must be done across New Zealand, and we need evidence for that. All right. Now in clause 9.2, the requirements of clause 9.2 evidently is internal audit requirement. So you must have procedure again for internal audit, and it's mandatory to keep records of internal audit and retain them for 3 years, mandatory requirements. And the auditor will come to verify and need evidence for QMS audits to ensure that are covering all the requirements annually. And auditors that are carrying your internal audit out must be competent and independent. That means they should not audit their own department. They need to be independent. And that also they will need evidence that non-conformances are identified and corrected as per audit best practices. All right? For example, in New Zealand here, non-conformances must be identified and corrected as per the New Zealand audit best practices. Clause 9.3 is the requirement for the management review. And here also, in cold chain organization quality management system, you are required to have a procedure for management review. And you need to keep management review records and the outcomes and the minutes of the meeting and evidence mandatory for 3 years. Auditors will come to check the evidence that the reviews are conducted minimum annually, and all the required inputs are considered, decisions and actions are documented with a focus on relevant market and regulatory environment. Example here in New Zealand context, it will require a focus on the New Zealand market and regulatory environment. That's clause 9. And for clause 10, clause 10.1, the requirement is improvement, and you must have improvement initiatives here, and you need to keep the records of the improvement, retain them for 3 years. Auditors will need evidence for continual improvement, including process optimization, technology upgrades, and efficiency gains, and customer satisfaction improvement as well. In New Zealand context, you will need to have New Zealand customer satisfaction improvements. And for clause 10.2 is the requirements of non-conformity and corrective actions. You need to create a procedure here for corrective actions and keep also corrective action records. This is a mandatory requirement, and the auditor will come to confirm and have evidence that non-conformances not conformances are addressed, the root causes are identified through, for example, 5Y or fishbone, and corrective actions are implemented and effectiveness is verified, and your actions are meeting industry standards. All right? That's the complete checklist of what you need to pass. If you have all these records and documents, you will 100% pass QMS. Now, let's look at QMS stage 1 audit in cold storage and logistics. Here is a stage 1 audit establishes whether an organization's, this is stage 1, okay? QMS is stage 1 audit for cold storage and logistics. A stage 1 audit establishes whether an organization's documented quality management system QMS is appropriate, complete, and ready for stage 2 verification. So that's what they come to do, to check that if you are ready for stage 2 and if your documented quality management system is appropriate and complete and ready for verification. So for example, in New Zealand context, this audit is a critical gateway for certification, with failure often delaying the process by several months. And this is also is common in many places. So you need to make sure that, like you are ready. If you just follow all the steps we show you, everything we show you there, you are more than ready for stage 1 and stage 2. Now, this is stage 1. First, they will come and check the scope and service definition. Auditors will verify the QMS scope accurately match actual cold storage and logistics operations, including all control activities as per the relevant food safety programs and occupational health and safety parameters. And we already gave you the example of how to create ideal scope. So just take all the elements we showed you and replicate that to your own organization, and you will be good to go. For example, here in New Zealand, this scope must include compliance with MPI food safety programs and WorkSafe New Zealand requirement, and we showed you earlier. The second thing they will come and check in stage 1 audit also is the contracts and SLA controls or service level agreement controls. They will review customer requirements, specifications, and service level commitment, ensuring alignment with contractual obligations. And also they will come to check the risk planning, like how I demonstrated to you earlier, how to carry out the risk planning, right? I hope it was clear. You can rewind it and you can replicate that in every aspect of your organizations. You will have to implement risk planning. Now, in stage 1 also, they will come to verify that risk planning documentation and national legislation. They will assess you that the documented risks and plan controls for logistics operations, considering key national legislations regarding health and safety, food safety, environmental management, and hazardous substances, as we demonstrated earlier. And also they will come to check operational records for verification of compliance. The basic operational records are reviewed usually in first stage or stage 1 to confirm the QMS is functioning effectively and demonstrably compliant with regulatory frameworks. So those are the stage 1 main functions. But the stage 1 main triggers that you need to avoid here the main triggers is when QMS does not match actual coal and logistics operations, cold storage and logistics operations, or significant system gaps identified against ISO standards and relevant nationally or regionally regulatory requirements. Now, in New Zealand context, this would include non-compliance with New Zealand regulatory requirement that will definitely trigger the deferral of stage 1. So that's what you need to consider. Now, let's look at stage 2, audit, the operational verification logistics. For cold storage and logistics operations or organizations, a stage 2 audit shifts focus from documented system to practical application. And you should not be dread about it. If you did everything that we have shown you, this should be, just a friendly interaction, and you will present all the evidences and definitely will excel. Auditors from accredited certification bodies spend considerable amount of time on site, and that's fine. That's also giving you a fresh eye. They will spend this time observing operational practices, interviewing personnel, your staff, and verifying records against actual conditions to ensure compliance with relevant local regulations. And that should be fine. You are ready. If you come this far from the beginning, you are more than ready. Don't worry. For example, in New Zealand context, this includes they will check the compliance with the Food Act of 2014 and Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015 alongside ISO standards. And they will definitely do that with you, with your local regulations, to check the compliance with your local regulations plus ISO standards. Now, in the context of the cold storage organization or the logistics organization, they will, for the duct and storage practices, the auditors here will observe receiving, storage allocation, and critical temperature monitoring procedures, and they will verify adherence to food safety program requirements and national cold chain standards. That's it. So, for example, in New Zealand context again, this involves compliance with MPI food safety program requirements for products destined for major retailers like, foodstuffs or Woolworth. So essentially, they will just observe your receiving and your storage allocation. When you receive, do you leave your things out there to, for temperature excursion? For allergen, do your duct segregated from allergen and non-allergen, the forklift conditions, the drivers, the staff, for the safety and quality and environmental, all this will be observed, just observation. But the temperature also is critical here, so they will check. How do you practice when you receive and when you store? Do you abuse temperature there? They will check that. And they will want to make sure you also, during receiving, you conduct your inspection, you check against the regulatory requirements to make sure you are compliant with the local regulatory. That's for the duct storage and storage practices, and for operators also under understanding and compliance. So this is what they will do in the second stage. They will interview staff to see their understanding of their operation procedures and their responsibility at work and their control and how they apply control measures, just to ensure that they align with approved code of practices and relevant health and safety legislations. And then for the records to match the operational reality, they will also check to see that. So they will conduct verification that the documented control are effectively implemented. Everything you put in document is real. They will come and check that. And that also you are effectively implementing what you have recorded accurately and it reflect the reality, and the conditions are compliant with cold chain facilities. And these include, for example, records for hazardous substances, which in New Zealand context are governed by the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act of 1996. That's all they do in second stage. Now let's look at the indicators of QMS excellence in operations here that you can also practice. And definitely if you follow everything up, you must be practicing it already. Now, excellence in quality management across operations is visible in operational behavior, data usage, and staff ownership. That's what we have been talking about since the beginning of this part of this part one of this training. All right, and these signals indicate a mature embedded QMS that will consistently pass audit, including those from regulatory bodies and independent certification bodies. So for instance, in New Zealand context, this include audit from MPI or Ministry of Primary Industry. Now, the first indicator of operational excellence is the deviation management. Okay? When deviations are logged and analyzed and drive corrective actions in accordance with relevant regulatory expectations and international standards and not hidden or minimized. And that's what we talked about earlier. Even if a deviation happened during your transportation for 5 minutes, you need to analyze that and apply corrective measures. That's the indicator of excellence. Now, for instance, in New Zealand context, this align with MPI food safety programs and WorkSafe New Zealand expectations. For example, as per the Health and Safety at Work Act of 2015. Oops, I have some glitch here. The second indicator will be staff ownership and compliance. All right? This indicator of operational excellence, when your operators understand service commitment and make decisions aligned with quality objectives, fostering a proactive culture of compliance with relevant legislations. All right? And finally, when you have data-driven decisions, when performance data from cold storage and logistics operations actively drive strategic decisions and continuous improvement, ensuring adherence to food safety regulations and meeting stringent demands. All right, so everything we have talked about so far, just take your time. Maybe you need to review any part, or you can review it one by one and take notes. And this part is ensuring you excel in QMS and you get certified in quality management system. It's easy, and just follow whatever we gave you, all the documents, all the practices, and you will be certified. That's part of QMS. And now we are going to move to the second part, which is for HSC. So this was going to be part 2. All right. Thank you, and see you in part 2.